Welcome back. Today we're reading Chapter 7. No place to sleep. Pandemonium broke loose in Mr. Updike's office in the City Hall. When he rushed into the place, Mr. Updike found his two fellow committeemen, Pettifetty and Robinlaw, wearing hurried and upset expressions to match his own. "A ghost," Updike shouted, as he faced them. "I tell you, boys, it's true. A ghost. So help me." The other men said simultaneously, Listen to him. Robinlaw took his cigar out of his mouth with shaking fingers and yelled, "It happened to us too. Pettifetty's wife and my wife are in my office. And are we in a spot?" Mr. Pettifetty shrugged his shoulders and held his hands out, palms forward, and wailed, "Yes, Robinlaw's wife and my wife both moved out of our apartments. They say the places were haunted." "Great Scott, then we're all in the same boat. No homes." Mr. Updike added mournfully. The three committeemen stared at each other. Then Pettifetty began to pace the floor. Updike and Robinlaw sat down and held their heads in their hands and groaned. Meanwhile, invisible Scarlet O'Neil, who had been responsible for the alarming situation confronting the city fathers, hurried over to the slum section of the town. She made herself visible and talked with three occupants of Cecil Strike's dilapidated apartments. Scarlet was so sincere and sympathetic that they trusted her immediately and were very willing to hear her plan. "Are you all interested in seeing this new housing project go through?" Scarlet asked, smiling at their enthusiastic agreement. They had heard of the rejected project. "If you're really interested in seeing all these old buildings demolished and new dwelling units erected in their place, I think I know how you can help," Scarlet explained. The three women listened eagerly as she continued. "First, all three of you must vacate your apartments in these old buildings." The three women looked at each other in consternation. But before they could utter a protest, Scarlet hastened to explain. "Perhaps you can live with your friends or relatives temporarily." The three women looked hesitant, yet they knew Scarlet was trying to help them and seemed fully confident of being capable of doing it. "It will only be for a week or perhaps 2 weeks. Tell Mr. Strike you're moving," Scarlet urged. Mrs. McDonald, the oldest of the three, frowned and reminded the others that they were all supposed to give Mr. Strike 30 to 90 days' notice if they planned to move away. Scarlet said she knew of the ruling. "Don't worry about that. It won't be necessary, I'm sure," she assured them. Mrs. McDonald smiled and shook Scarlet's hand trustingly. "It's okay, if you think so," she told her. And the other two housewives said they would be glad to do it if Scarlet thought it best. Scarlet promised them that they would not be sorry, then bade them a hurried farewell. She knew she had to work fast. She drove to a drugstore, telephoned the landlords of the apartment houses the committeemen had vacated and came back to her car with a pleased expression on her face. She turned the car and headed for the office of Charles Dew, going as fast as the law allowed. She ran up the steps, 2 at a time, and burst into Charles' office. Charles turned to her in surprise. Scarlet said breathlessly, "Oh, Charlie, don't ask me any questions. Just go up to Mr. Updike, Mr. Robinlaw, and Mr. Pettyfetty and tell them you heard Strike had 3 apartments vacant." "What? I don't get this. I'm not even acquainted with those 3 investigators. I didn't even know their names until today when I called the mayor," he said. Scarlet picked up his hat and handed it to him. And she pushed him toward the door, saying, "Just do as I say, but hurry as fast as you can." Charlie knew Scarlet well enough to know that she was serious. He obediently rushed from the room toward the city hall, where the 3 committee men were still holding a mournful consultation. "Well, gentlemen, what are we going to do?" Mr. Updike asked in a hopeless and despairing voice. Mr. Pettyfetty answered the question by asking another. "Where are we going to sleep tonight?" Mr. Robinlaw stood there, saying nothing but looking glum. He glanced at the doorway, which framed the breathless young architect, Charles Dew. Charles said, "Ahem." The 3 men looked at him and then looked away. "I beg your pardon. I'm Charles Dew, the architect who—" Charlie began. Robinlaw waved him aside with an impatient gesture, saying, "Sorry, Dew, we're busy. Say, you don't just happen to know of any vacant apartments, do you?" Charlie smiled and stepped into the room. "Did you say something about a vacant apartment?" he asked. Updike turned nervously toward him. "Yes. You don't know of any, do you?" he demanded. Light was beginning to dawn on Charlie. He was beginning to have an inkling of Scarlet's plan. He observed casually, "Funny you should ask me that. I just heard Cecil Strike has 3 apartments vacant. Of course, they're not—" He was about to add that he did not think the apartments would be desirable, considering their location and condition, but thought better of it. The 3 officials shouted in unison, Did you say 3? They began a frenzied search for their hats. "Yes, 3 apartments. Cecil Strike has them. At least, that's what I heard," Charles said. He was almost knocked down as the trio stampeded toward the door, pulling on their coats and their hats and shouting, "Gangway!" Robinlaw stuck his head in his office and shouted, "I think we got something, dear," at his wife, and then rushed out to Updike's car. Updike broke all speed records for his car in his haste to get to Strike's real estate office, while Robinlaw and Pettyfetty urged him to go faster. They stormed Cecil Strike's private sanctum just as Strike finished talking to 3 of his tenants, who mysteriously announced they were moving at once. Updike clamped his hand on Strike's shoulder and panted, "Strike, we hear you have 3 vacant apartments. We want them." Pettyfetty and Robinlaw solemnly nodded in agreement to Updike's demand. "What? I have, but you—" Strike stammered. He was trying to stall for time, while he attempted to figure out why the 3 city investigators suddenly wanted to rent his apartments in such a neighborhood. "No buts about it," Robinlaw said in his sternest manner. He pulled a handful of bills from his wallet and waved them at Strike. We're paying in advance and moving in tonight. Cecil Strike thought of the tumble-down, weather-beaten old buildings in which the apartments were suddenly vacant and began to laugh. Oh, but gentlemen, you're just kidding. Of course, surely you wouldn't want to live in. We saw the apartments you showed us, and we admit they're bad, but not too bad when there's nowhere else to live. Petty Fetty interrupted. He thrust the rent money in Strike's hands. Cecil Strike turned pale and began to mop his brow. He could hardly explain that the only apartments fit to live in were the ones he had shown them. He said feebly, yes, but those, aren't the vacant apartments. Well, they're all just about the same. We'll be back in an hour with our wives and move in, Petty Fetty said. But gentlemen, please, you won't like them, Strike protested. But the city investigators paid no attention to him. Scarlet O'Neil was very much pleased with herself when she returned to her own apartment that evening. She had thoroughly enjoyed enacting the part of a ghost. And now she had only to sit back and await results. She was certain they would be successful, but wondered how much time it would require. The Updikes, Petty Fettys, and Robin Laws should be in their new apartments by now. Oh, I wonder how they like them. I'll pay them a visit tomorrow, she said to herself. She was tired after her day's activity, but her mind stayed on the plan she was following. I'm positive after living under those conditions for a few days, the committeemen and their wives will be only too glad to condemn that property. I didn't want to take such drastic steps, but something had to be done for those poor folks living in Strike's tumble-down, ramble-shackle old dwellings, she told her reflection in the mirror, as though to salve her conscience. I asked Petty Fetty's, Updike's, and Robin Law's former landlords to hold their apartments vacant for them. They agreed when I explained the situation, so everything should work out all right. Scarlet laughed softly to herself as she thought of the visit she would pay to the haughty Mrs. Updike in her new surroundings. Join me next time as we read Chapter 8, Condemned Property. It's gonna be good. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.